Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Nate Bagley and I am the founder of the Lovumentary, and I'm so glad that you guys could join us here for today's webinar about moving past the pain of a breakup. My guest today is Vienna Pharaon, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist in New York. She was trained at Northwestern University by the Family Institute and now practices privately out of her office in Midtown Manhattan. And Vienna is also the founder of an amazing company called Mind Sweat. It's a therapy technique that combines intensive physical activity followed immediately by talk therapy, and she leads retreats around the country and soon around the world for singles and couples, and I've heard amazing, amazing things about people who've experienced it. Vienna, welcome to
Thanks,
the
Nate.
webinar. So
Yeah,
excited to have you here.
thanks for
Um,
having me.
so our topic today is breakups, and let's just be honest, breakups really suck and they're really
Mhm.
painful. Can we start off by talking about where that pain comes from?
Yeah. Breakups are really tough, and I want to kind of label it as endings to relationships because I imagine that some of the people that are viewing this are going through a breakup. Some might be going through a divorce. So there's a lot of different types of endings, and also kind of before we start, I did want to just say we know that there's no manuscript to this. So everybody that's tuning in right now, this isn't, do these 5 things and everything's going to change. We know everybody has their own story out there. There's a lot of different things that impact what you're going through right now. So we know that this isn't, the end all be all. Follow these things and you'll be okay. But we just want to be able to help you and maybe shed some light and give you new thoughts. So,
Beautifully said.
so with that said, endings are very difficult. There's a lot of emotion that we're feeling in that space, right? A lot of what I notice from a lot of people is we have an interesting relationship with emotion, right? There's a lot of narrative about emotion that we're supposed to fear it, right? Emotion is good. I want to make sure that we identify this first, that emotion is good. It's just that when the emotion floods us, right, and there's a difference. When the emotion becomes flooding, that's where we see ourselves having issue with it, because that's the space where it becomes really overwhelming. Emotion is good, right? We have to give ourselves permission to feel. Emotion tells us a lot of information. It lets us know how we're feeling. So we need to start to shift that relationship with emotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find can it be like damaging to avoid those emotions?
Sure, yeah, of course. I mean, I think what winds up happening is with that when we go from, I'm feeling sad to I'm devastated. I don't know if I can go on. This always happens to me. When it switches over to something that does flood us more, we don't really know what to do with that. It's in that space that we don't really know how to articulate our emotions, right? So we can either go to avoidance. So that could mean us entirely checking out and shutting down. That might show up if somebody says, "How are you doing?" and you just say, "Oh, I'm fine. It doesn't bother me at all," or "I'm over it. No big deal." It's like, it hurts because it mattered, right? Like if you don't feel something, that's when I think something's wrong, right? If
Yeah.
you're feeling, right, that's normal, right? That's super normal. So the avoidant part there isn't good. Then we can also go into total escape, right? So where it's another type of avoidance, but maybe we're turning to alcohol. Your comment, alcohol, drugs, overeating, sex, just sleeping with anybody. These are the types of things that keep us from focusing on the emotion that's really important for us to feel. And then there's also that other part, another type of avoidance where we kind of, that flooding really does take over. And that might look like being in bed all day. That might mean crying constantly. That might mean not picking up the phone when your friends call. That might not mean not going outside, right? So we have these kind of different versions of avoidance that are lousy, right? And
Yeah.
look, I think most of us have probably been at somewhere there before, but we need to be able to shift that relationship with emotion, to be able to talk about it, to be able to express, this is what I'm feeling and this is why I'm feeling it. But we don't know how to do that, right? That's where we have a lot of the trouble in understanding why we're feeling what we're feeling.
Absolutely. And I think the way that the world and society teaches us to deal with these emotions is not
Hmm.
necessarily always the best way. So, like what you said, there's a lot of people who avoid through substances, or they I've heard a lot of friends who would give the lip service of like, oh, he didn't deserve you, and they just
Hmm.
try. They don't necessarily listen or practice empathy, but
Hmm.
they can kind of I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that we get a lot of messages around endings. I try to invite people to identify what the messages are around that. So whether it's what messages we've received from parents or caretakers or society, generally we see endings as a bad thing. We see them as a failure, right? Not too often do I hear people in a space where they're, I don't want to say celebrating an ending. I think that's too much on the other side, but that you're able to understand like what your transformation has been. That's one of the things that I talk about all the time. And if people have kind of visited some of my social media stuff, they probably know this, that like I don't talk about success of a relationship based on how long you've been with somebody, but rather how much they've transformed you, right? So
Mhm.
whether you've been in a relationship for a few weeks, a few months, years, you've been married and it's been a partnership with children and it's been decades, like it's about how you've been transformed. So we look at endings and we're fearful of them. We say, oh, this is bad, I'm a failure, I should feel ashamed. A lot of times people will lead with the question like, well, how long have you been with the person? And you're like, is that really the defining part to the relationship? So our messages around endings are important. I'm glad that you brought that up. I talk about family systems with my clients often. Not often, always. That's something that is crucial to understanding why we do what we do, why we believe what we believe. So it's important to understand that relationship with endings. What did you see? And it's not just parents, it's people around you, but what did you see? Did people, when relationships ended, whether it was divorce, whether it was remarrying and getting divorced, whether it was staying together and sending the message that you never give up on a relationship no matter how bad it is, or, like you have to understand what messages we've received around endings to understand why we're feeling what we're feeling about them. Oftentimes it can be flooded with shame. Something ended and now you have to share that information with
Mm.
friends or family. Maybe you're getting pressure from family that says, "Oh, you should be married by now," or oh my gosh, divorce, you're going to be the first one getting a divorce in our family. That type of stuff needs to be acknowledged, because it really can dictate where the emotions go and how intense the flooding can be, right?
Yeah, it takes a lot, I think, to be able to step, not only to experience the emotion, but then to step back and realize like what is causing this? How am I reacting? Like
Mm-hmm.
what's the process I'm going through? Am I hiding? Am I processing this the right way? Is there shame? That's a really powerful thing to be able to step
Sure.
back when you're going through a breakup. I'm really glad we're talking about this right now because I actually am just going through a breakup, so I'm like learning a lot right
Mm-hmm.
here. Like how
Mm-hmm.
am I avoiding? Am I processing my
Mm-hmm.
emotions? So you have. I know we wanted to go over some specific steps. There's 5 things that you've outlined that will help people get past a breakup, and we've kind of touched on a couple of them. But I want to get really specific and kind of dive deep into some of these because
Yeah.
I think they're really going to benefit some of the people that are listening.
Yeah.
Um, can we talk a little bit about your process? I know the first one is to what we first talked about is to let yourself
Right.
feel the emotion.
Right. Yeah. So I think that when we're talking about this, as we kind of fluidly go through it, we'll identify kind of what that specific tip is. Then at the end, towards the end, we'll really outline this again, so people who are listening are able to, if you want to jot it down or you want to have a clear picture of it, we'll do that. But right, the first part is letting yourself feel. Right. And we're talking about that, and it's
Hmm.
giving yourself permission to do that. It does hurt. It hurts. It mattered to you, right? And when you avoid, you're doing such a disservice to yourself, right? It's not that, oh, if I just feel, I'll get over it. No, there's more to it than that, right? But we have to start with giving ourselves permission to feel. That kind of sounds simple. It's not. I get that. It's not always. But I think when you have good people around you, you do webinars, you sign up for things, you have this kind of constant reminder, whether it's in a news feed or whatever it might be, that just gently reminds you that it's okay for you to have the emotion. It's normal for you to have the emotion. And the best thing that you can do is give yourself that space to feel it. I will say one of the things that I do talk to my clients about is, especially if they're in a space where it can shift over to being flooded, sometimes it helps to just carve out a specific amount of time where you'll actually just let yourself feel in that space, and then you say, okay, like I'm off for my day or whatever it is. And I think in the beginning that can be helpful because you're still honoring yourself in that space. You're still saying, look, it's okay to feel. Go ahead, bawl your eyes out, go in the shower, sit down, whatever you need to do. But then you're also saying, you know what? You can go live. You can go out there and do your thing, right? So you're still honoring these different parts of yourself. So in the beginning, if you are feeling incredibly flooded with the emotion, you're not sure how to articulate it, what to do with it, sometimes just giving yourself 20 minutes, just say, just feel. Go ahead.
That's a great tip.
Let it go. And then once the 20 minutes is up, wipe your face, whatever you need to do, and kind of go back out there and create purpose for yourself. Go back to the different parts of your identity. With that said, I think going back and kind of understanding why we're feeling what we're feeling too is we're losing a role. We're losing a piece of our purpose. We're losing a part of our identity when an ending happens, right? We are a partner to somebody. Day in, day out, hours here, hours there, whatever it is, but we're a partner to somebody. And maybe we've been a partner to that person for a month. Maybe we've been a partner to them for 20 years. Right? But this role is kind of being taken from you in this space, right? That's at least if you're the one that's being broken up with, or
right.
But the same thing, if you're the person that's ending the relationship, you're
it's still
also
part of your identity.
It sure is, right? It's still removing a role, right? And so people start to think, oh my gosh, what's my day going to look like? I don't know how to wake up without you next to me. What do you mean? You're not going to have my coffee made for me? Like, we're not going to watch the show that we love together? Like, all of these things start to kind of pop into our mind, and in that space, it gets flooded again because all of these thoughts, all of these images of this is what we do together, this is what normal life looks like to me. Now my life is turned upside down. We lose that purpose. We lose being a partner. This is what I do for you every day. I call you. I text you. We cuddle. That's gone. And that can be really frightening.
Terrifying. And I think, going through this right now, another thing that really causes a lot of pain is breaking up not only with the partnership, like that part of your identity, but all of the stuff that you had planned in your future. Like, you had this future life kind of mapped out in your brain of what was going to happen and how are you going to spend your holidays and what were you going to be doing, and all of a sudden that stuff just doesn't matter anymore. Or not that it doesn't matter, but it isn't real. What once was real in your brain, so breaking up with that future projection of your life, it can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, such a great point. I actually find that a lot of the emotion comes from that space. So it is, this loss of the day-to-day. It's the loss of that role, purpose, identity. It's the flooding of emotion. How did this happen? What's wrong? Is there something wrong with me? On and on and on. But what I do find, and what I hear from a lot of the people that I work with, is that the emotion is, so much of it is in this loss of the fantasy of the future, right? Very early on, we do start to fantasize about our futures with somebody. When you're enjoying it with the person, very quickly, again, we have those images of what it's going to look like, where we'll live, what we'll be doing, what life will look like if we're married, and if you're married, what life will look like, with children, on and on, right? Absolutely. And there are all of these pictures that create this image of our future world. That part, when that part gets wiped, I find that actually can be more intense sometimes for people. And sometimes it's hard for people to even identify that. They're like, when they hear it, they're like, that makes sense. Like I'm thinking I'm just like losing this right the here and now, which is important, but it's also this future. It's your life. It's this, you let yourself go into this beautiful fantasy, and now that part is taken too, right? So there's so much loss that we don't realize is happening, which, as you might imagine, adds to the emotional flooding. Right?
It does.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth mentioning that the emotions aren't. You mentioned that they're not a bad thing, but there's this thing that occurs in nature that's contrast. Like there's polarities, and sometimes it's like you've got the night and the day, and you've got the North Pole and the South Pole, and you've got winter and summer, and you've got these beautiful like life and death, and there's all these polarities, and happiness and sadness are definite polarities. And the sad times, like I don't think we would truly appreciate, it may sound cliche to say this, but I don't think we can fully and truly appreciate the happy times unless we experience sadness and despair and that grief.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're, like you said before, it's beautiful when we can take a step back, when we have that space to be able to look at it and have a different relationship with it. But when we do get to that successfully, we are able to recognize transformation and growth. I think part of the polarity, too, is that I want to make note that we can feel a lot of contradictory, opposing feelings in this space, too. So there might be time where you're feeling deep sadness, but there also might be relief in that. Like there could be a part of you that wasn't ending the relationship, even though you knew that it wasn't right for you, and now this person ended it instead, right? I've been there before. Where I've known that a relationship really wasn't working for me, and then he broke up with me, and I was like, what? Wait. It
was not working for me, not for you.
I'm okay with this, but I'm not okay with this. The ego takes a hit. But I think it's also really good for us to say that it's normal to have opposing feelings in this space. I've posted about this too before, that like when you have this ending, there can be this ego bruising that goes on for the person that's being broken up with, right? And that part can be super, super painful, because the narrative can be, what's wrong with me? Am I not this enough? Am I not that enough? This always happens to me. I'll never be, somebody's never going to choose me. I'm going to be alone forever, right? And that just kind of goes and goes and goes and goes and can really spiral out of control.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've felt that before.
Yeah, I think that's a very natural human phenomenon.
Yeah, sure.
It definitely shows up that in the form of self-doubt and self-loathing, and starting over is hard. Like, I think that's one of the hardest things that I'm experiencing right now, is realizing that you have to go back after a breakup or after an ending and start at the so how many kids are in your family, and where did you go to school, or what do you do for work? And it's like you start to wonder if this is what your life is going to be like for the rest of your life. Are you always going to be stuck in this phase? So I think it's really easy to get inside your head and almost like self-defeat or become fatalistic. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I think, thinking about the narratives is really important in this space, because we can have sometimes we're attached to outcomes. I need to be married by X age, 30. I need to have kids by this. And so if an ending happens and then we get frightened about, oh my gosh, well, how am I going to meet somebody? How am I going to go through that beginning stage of like getting to
my life is no longer according to plan.
Right. Like 2 years of getting to know this person, a year of engagement, then, it's like, and then I'm 35, and it's like, or kids, for women, that's a common, it's a fear, right? That there's only a certain amount of time, and obviously there's a range, and there are people who've obviously gotten pregnant very late in life, but, people feel this pressure. And so if an ending happens during a time where we're like, wait, I don't have enough time left, right? Like, oh, this can't be happening, that can cause and create a lot of panic too.
Totally.
It's also important to think about culture, in different parts of the country. I'm in Manhattan, so, that's different than maybe more southern states, for example, where what's acceptable, I'm putting kind of quotes around that, but like what's acceptable is different. You see a culture in Manhattan where people are pretty focused on career and, relationships, really like focusing in on that. This isn't obviously true for everyone, but focusing in on that doesn't really happen until late 20s, 30s for people, and that's entirely acceptable and normal. Somewhere else, it might be normal and expected to be ready for that in your early 20s, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to think about the different messages that we do have around culture and around gender, and what those narratives are and how we subscribe to them. Is that what's leading our emotion, or are we able to take control of that?
Right. So we talked a little bit about like the importance of feeling the emotion and how that can be a real big benefit. So now that we're feeling the emotion, what's a good step to start dealing with it? Or moving past it, moving forward from all of the sadness and pain?
Yeah, I mean, the second part to the 5 tips is talking about it and sharing it over and over and over again. This means saying the same thing 13 times in the same day to 13 different people. This is you talking about it, having, it's friends and family, it's people who will listen, that have that are able to be compassionate with you, that are able to shed some light, maybe on your own blind spots too. Not just, screw him, shoot, forget about her. That's not what people need in this space. You need somebody to listen and to process with you. I can remember going through a breakup and getting on the phone with like probably 10 people in one day and doing this over and over again and having almost the same conversation. And I would talk it through. I have such great friends. They would talk it through. We'd process. It would be good. I'd hang up the phone. I'd call the next person. We'd do the same thing. I'd process it. I'd have to hear it over and over again. Hang up, call the next person. It was really like that. It sounds like you're overdoing it. Yeah. You need to overdo it. You need to have that support. You need to have that space to share it, especially in the beginning. I said this to you before, like people really subscribe to time heals all wounds. That's a myth. Time does not heal all wounds. Time well spent heals, right? And it's important to connect to that. You cannot just sit and expect that with time things will get better. Things do not get better if you don't start to challenge your narratives. Things do not get better if you don't talk about them and understand things from through a different lens, right? Yeah. So do not subscribe to time heals all wounds. Time well spent, you must commit to that, right? So share, overshare, keep doing it. And if you're a friend of somebody that's going through a breakup right now and listening, checking in with that person, a quick message to them, every day, just saying, hey, thinking about you, or how are you? It might make them emotional when they get it, but I know that that's something that helps people so much, just to know that somebody's thinking about them and caring about them and just checking in and saying hi.
I love it. There's something to be said for not getting stuck in just feeling the emotion and starting to move past it. I think that's important. Having that support system and being able to process and tell the story over. I mean, is that part of the grieving process of loss? Yeah. Is being able to tell the story?
Yeah, and when you tell it over and over again, your lens does start to change. The first day it might be 10 people. The second week it might be 5. And then from there it might just be, every other day. And in that space, how we feel about what's happened does change. When we hear it over and over again, we get different insight, we see different things, we feel different things. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is that once we were able to kind of process through some of that in the beginning, we're actually able to recognize and identify what our transformation has been. This person did this for me, right? They opened up this
Mhm.
space. Like, I am a big believer in everything is happening for us. It's not happening to you. And when you shift that thinking, right, it's not the world is against us, everything's happening to me, right? We might not be able to see it in that moment, but there's something that's happening for us. And when we can just commit to that and kind of believe in that, right, it does help us in the process.
Yeah. So I've noticed that one of the effects of my recent ending, I'm going to start calling
Mhm.
them endings now because I like that. Um, so what I've noticed is that my life was so ingrained in this other person's life,
Mhm.
and like that's where I spent my free time. It's where I invested a
Mhm.
lot of my emotional time and energy.
Mhm.
So like now that the relationship has ended, I find myself with a social dynamic that's kind of like my friend group I haven't been spending as much time with, and so those
Mhm.
connections aren't there, and I have a lot more free time that's just empty.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
what?
Right. Yeah, this is the point when we're talking about purpose, identity, like having a role. You're
Yeah.
talking about this is what I used to do with her all the time, and now I'm not doing as many of those things, right? So this is kind of the third part of, stay busy, not avoidant, right? So a lot of times
What's the
people will
difference between
avoid.
the two? Yeah.
Yeah, because the avoidant part is like, I'm gonna go out all the time. At least I'm busy. At least I'm gonna drink heavily. I'm gonna do this. Like that's not your that's not your identity. You're not taking care of the parts of yourself. This is about doing the things that you love to do because you love to do them. This is, whether you play a sport. This is going out and playing tennis. This is going for a run. This is going to an art class. This is going to concerts. This is going to, you know what I mean? Like, this is learning a new language. This is traveling. This is
Hmm.
just doing things that are a part of you that you have to rev up, right? A lot of times when we're with a person, some of the things that we love actually can fall off a little bit, right? Maybe we don't join a league, or maybe we don't take the class that we've been wanting to take, or maybe we don't, like, it's about
Yeah.
doing the things that we love to do because they inspire us, they fill us up, they create purpose in our lives, good purpose, right? Not avoidance, not let me check out of my life because it sucks right now, right? Like, let me do whatever I can do to just fill this space. Because in that space, it's turning to, a hookup. It's turning to alcohol. It's turning to food. It's turning to, like, you get kind of rooted in these things that are not giving you clear and healthy
Yeah.
purpose, right? Does that make
I feel
sense?
like yeah, I feel like this step is kind of like you're reclaiming your identity.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've lost this part of your identity that is being in a relationship and all that future, and
Sure.
so now it's like, oh, I have all this open space, and I don't.
Sure.
That part of me is lost. So you're like reclaiming. And you can't do that without getting into action. You can't
Right.
do that without doing something. So staying busy,
Yeah.
beautiful tip.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's it's this reminder that we exist outside of this person. I think sometimes when we are flooded, we forget that, right? That our entire identity winds up being wrapped up in that relationship. So that's a real problem, right? Like, if your entire purpose and identity is solely through the relationship, you're going to struggle, right?
Yeah.
You're going to struggle. That's why people who have different parts of their identity and juggle them well generally tend to do better in this space because, yes, a part is gone, but they still have other things that allow them to exist and to know that they exist. Like, a part is taken, but the rest of them is there, right? Now, we might need to amp it up a little bit, um, but that's the space. Like, if a lot of your identity is in that person, in the relationship, right, that's where you need to turn towards new purpose, new identity, going out there and trying something new, right? Like, if you just don't do anything right now, you have to try something. You must.
So here's a
Mm-hmm.
a question that's a
Yeah.
tangent. Tangential? I think that's
Tangentially, yeah, you
yeah.
got it.
All right, thanks. So when you're involved in a relationship, how do
Uh-huh.
you keep yourself from having your identity defined by that relationship? I know it's really easy for people to get sucked in to that and just
Sure.
like have their
Hmm.
give up all these different aspects of their life and be
Yeah.
consumed by the relationship. What are some tips that you have to kind of avoid that
Well,
pitfall?
it's a tricky one because people can really fall into that quite easily. If you don't have a strong sense of self and purpose already established, it's very easy to go into that space. It's very easy to become codependent within the relationship. Um, what's interesting is there's a lot of research around desire. Esther Perel gives this beautiful TED talk about love and
I
desire,
love
and
it.
one of the things that she talks about is how, where she was asking couples, like, when do you desire your partner the most? And one of the top answers was that when I see my partner like existing outside of me, doing something like not too far away, like I can still see, you're within reach, but I see you having an identity outside of me. So that might mean watching somebody on stage give a presentation, or it might mean watching somebody in their pickup basketball game, or it might mean like it's seeing them exist outside of you. Because what's so beautiful about that is that that they're choosing you, right? They don't
Mm.
need you. They're choosing you. Something that I talk about quite a bit too, right? So you see them, that they exist, and it makes you you need to be on. You need to be better because they're choosing you as long as you're choosing you.
Yeah.
Like as long as you're up, as long as you guys keep upping the ante with each other, that's the space. So look, it's very difficult. If you're used to kind of falling into that space where everything gets wrapped up with that person, but it's important to be able to exist on your own. If you can't do that, it's you're gonna find some trouble within the relationship. So a lot of times we talk about like needing to know how to be alone first, right? Like making your alone so beautiful. It's one of my favorite quotes. My alone feels so good, I'll only have you if you're sweeter than my solitude. How
Mm,
beautiful is that? It's like
that is
I
beautiful.
exist on my own. My alone is kick-ass. Like it is great. I will have you if you're sweeter than it. Because being with somebody when it's great is better than that. You want to be around it. They call you to be better. They make you a better, they create that space. They challenge you. It's a beautiful, beautiful space. So I often suggest to people to try to have that space where they are alone and they can make it
Yeah.
beautiful.
It is that sense of otherness or that separation that really creates desire. It's hard to
Yeah,
desire the apple that you have in your mouth. Like
sure,
if
sure.
it's you don't desire it when you're eating it, you desire it before you eat it,
Hmm.
And so having that separation is really what creates that desire. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the Disney mentality that like once you fall in love, you should want to do everything together, and just there's
Hmm.
something wrong if you don't want to be with this person 24/7. And so
Hmm.
they get caught up in that idea, and then you lose that sense of identity and separateness, which ends
Hmm.
up ironically killing that passion.
Yeah, it really can. It really can.
That's
Hmm.
beautifully said.
Yeah.
So let's
Um,
let's go to the next step on your. Oh, did you have something to add?
no, not so. No, not to that part.
All right, cool.
Hmm.
So the next step on your list after staying busy and not avoidant is
Hmm.
exercise, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love
This is like your MO. This is where
it.
we
Yep.
combine so much of what you're passionate about. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, this is a big one. For some people it is working out. There are other things that can save a person, but working out, it's not just good for your body. We know this. People will prescribe, oh, go do this. This is good for you. It's important to understand what's happening when we work out. And this is why I say, like, in that space, work out every day. Like, go outside. You need to do that. You have to go for a run or spin or whatever it is that you do, but you have to get moving. And it's in this space that, of course, endorphins are getting released. We have serotonin, dopamine, right? These neurotransmitters that are boosting our mood, decreasing our pain, right? And it's creating this space here where we're not as emotionally flooded. right? I'm sure that there's plenty of people who are listening right now that are kind of nodding their heads, right? Like, yeah, you go for a great workout, you feel good afterwards. I go for a run. If I ever have a big decision I need to make, I always go for a run first, right? Always. And it clears your mind, right? So part of what Mind Sweat is, I think you mentioned that in my bio, it's the combination of intensive physical activity, right? We're elevating ourselves, right? We're getting to that space where we're releasing all of that. And then talk therapy immediately following it. So we're capitalizing on the release of everything that I just explained, right? And then allowing ourselves to operate and process through things from a less emotionally flooded space. Right. So when you go back to step number 2, share with your friends, talk about it. Well, go for a run first, and then call your friends up, or go for a run and sit somewhere and try to process through some things on your own. Like this is something that is so crucial. It clears our mind. It's a release. Sometimes people will even report like crying while they're running. Good. Let that out. Like let that be your space. But it's critical to do that, to get that exercise, to be taking care of yourself, because you're sending yourself that message. I'm going to choose to work out. I'm going to choose to do something good for myself. In that message, you're saying, I care about myself. Right? You have to think about what messages you're sending yourself by the choices that we're making. Am I choosing to stay in bed? Am I choosing to do that? Like, what are we choosing, and what message is that sending? I'm never going to feel better, or I love myself to do this even though I might not want to do it. Right?
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I've noticed that if we're the hardest part is starting.
Oh, for sure.
You need to work out, and like whenever I think about working out, especially when I'm feeling like really emotionally flooded or crappy, I'm just like, oh man, I really don't want to go to the gym. I really don't want to do this. And then when I get off my butt and put on my gym shorts and just go, an hour later, I'm like, oh, I feel so much better. It's
look, there are times for sure where you don't have a great workout, right? Like we know there are times you go and you're like, meh, I could have done without that one. But most of the time we feel good afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's more about what's going on in the brain and the signals that we're sending ourselves. We're choosing to take care of ourselves. That's the beautiful part. We're choosing to take care of ourselves. I know it's not working out for everyone, okay? Sometimes it's playing music. Sometimes it's drawing or painting. There's different things that can be therapeutic, that can ignite something in you that serves that in a very similar way. There's just so much around working out and what's getting stimulated in the brain.
Absolutely.
And that's why I find that to be particularly purposeful for me, and for a lot of people. But of course, there are other things that you can do that will give you that message that you're taking care of yourself also.
Yeah, I know one thing that's really helped me to break that barrier between like thinking that I need to do something and then actually doing it, especially working out, is I'll like sleep in my workout clothes.
That's good.
And then I wake up and it's like removing the barrier to entry to getting through the gym. Like I don't have to change my clothes. I just put on my shoes and go.
I like that a lot. I'm going to use that one.
Do. Sometimes that's like you just have to start thinking ahead of what are the ways that you can decrease friction to the things that you want to be doing or you'd like to be doing more of, and how do you increase friction for the things that might be causing you more pain. So like for me, a biggest way I become avoidant is I'll turn on TV and I'll just like marathon watch a TV series or something like that. So I've noticed that if I take the batteries out of my remote and like hide them somewhere, and I'm required to like spend 30 seconds to go pick up the batteries on the other side of the room and then put them back in the remote. By the time I get there, I'm just like, oh man, this probably isn't the best choice for me right now. So increasing the friction there into the areas where I'm avoidant, and then decreasing the friction for like working out or for spending time with my friends is something that has really helped me to kind of cope in that area. So
yeah, I like that. That's a great that's a great tool. I do you sleep in your socks too?
No. Who
Okay.
sleeps in socks? Come on.
Well, you said you were going to be totally prepared for just throwing those shoes on. um, did I lose you here, Nate? I,
Sorry, you froze up for a second there.
okay, we're back.
We're back. Hi.
Um, hey, yeah. All right,
No,
so you
I
put the
don't sleep in
socks
my
and shoes
socks.
on.
No.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I mean, I think too, sometimes having a buddy is a really good way to stay accountable.
Accountability buddies. Accountability buddy.
Accountability, it is. I mean, that can be corny for some people, but
So
um,
helpful though.
it is helpful. When you have somebody that's really just calling you into that space, that's important. And so that can really help sometimes. So that's the fourth one. I mean, that's the purpose behind exercise. It's trying to find, what's going to get in my way. How do I handle it? Like you said, it might just be, I don't want to get out and put my clothes on. So putting your clothes on before you go to bed, or if you know that this is a narrative that you go to, what's something that you're going to say to yourself to either discredit the narrative that's going to keep you from doing what you want to be doing. So yeah, that's important.
So what would you say is what's the next step after exercise in your 5-step series?
The fifth one is surrounding yourself with people who love you. This is important because in this space, it's very easy to feel not so particularly lovable, right? When a relationship is ending, we can really question. We can question whether we are worthy, whether we're lovable, whether or not people care about us. And it's easy to go into that negative space. Again, the emotions are flooding us. It's harder to think clearly and know that we are loved. So this one is important. It's choosing to be around people who do love us, because we need to be able to have that kind of constant reminder, constant message being resent to us over and over and over again. The narrative gets questioned. So we need the narrative to kind of be hushed, essentially, right? Like, where we have people coming in and just saying, no, you're great. Let's go do things together. I want to be around you. You are lovable. So we definitely need to put ourselves around family and friends who create that sense of feeling with us. Right?
I love it. Can we talk a little bit about narratives and kind of what they are and how they work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm
sure there's some people listening who this is like a new concept for them.
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly talking to ourselves pretty much all day, every day, right? And sometimes we're aware of it. Sometimes we can hear ourselves. It's kind of that chatter in our heads where we're debating something. Oh, should I do this? Should I stay in line for this coffee? It's too long. I need to get back to work. It's waking up, like the first thing, I'm still tired. I just want to stay in bed. Or, I'm ready. It's the second we wake up to the second we go to sleep, we're constantly going. In that space, we're telling ourselves things, right? And the narratives can be pretty brutal sometimes. When I talk to clients about like what they're hearing themselves say about themselves, it can be bad stuff. Like that they're worthless, that they're not, they're too much of this, too little of that, not enough of this. Like it can be really, really harsh stuff, and that is going to be one of the biggest things to kind of, we need to be able to get a hold of that narrative. We need to be able to replace the narrative with things that we believe to be true. I don't mean just like make things up, but we need to be able to understand why we have that narrative, from where it comes, right? And why we've adopted it, right? Why are we so brutal with ourselves? Why do we adopt narratives that maybe other people have said? So, for example, because we bring in the family part here, it's like when we're growing up, what are the messages? And they don't always have to be verbal messages, right? These can be nonverbal messages that are being delivered to us. But like, what do we know about our role in the family? Did we feel loved? Did we feel cared about? Did we feel important? Did we feel like we were that there's this sense of belonging, right? Like, what are the messages that we've received growing up? What do we say about ourselves? I'm smart. I'm beautiful. I'm this. I'm that. Like, or oh, I'm too fat. I'm the, and is that because somebody sent that message? Look, it's not just parents. We know it's friends, it's society, it's constantly around us. But it's, why are we adopting certain ones? Well, the ones that we hear, the ones that are being sent our way often are the ones that we generally tend to start to believe as truth. It happens at an early age and it starts to build and build. And then by the time that we're adults, we're subscribing to this over and over and over again, right? Does that make sense? Are you
Yeah,
following the
it totally
narrative?
makes sense. And I feel like there's a little bit of an overlap. I've noticed this in my life. Like, have you ever played the slug bug game?
No.
Where like you're driving down the road. I did this a lot as a kid. My brothers
Okay.
and I would play, and we'd be like on a road trip, and you look for the Volkswagen Beetles, and every time you see a Volkswagen Beetle, we call them slug bugs or
Okay.
punch buggies or something like that. Some people
That
call them.
I've played.
Yeah, and you
Punch Buggy
punch your
Yellow.
brother in the arm until he tells
Sure.
you what color of the punch buggy he saw.
Uh-huh.
But then like you never ever see a Volkswagen bug on the road until you start playing that game, and then they're everywhere. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of the time these narratives, like when we constantly hear something, we start to see the punch buggies in our lives that support the
Mm-hmm.
narrative that we're telling ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Sure.
like somebody says you're stupid,
Right.
and you get this narrative in your head, I'm stupid, and then every time you screw up, you're like, oh, that's validation that I'm
Sure.
stupid. And then all of a
Sure.
sudden it becomes the punch buggy, or I'm not pretty
Mm-hmm.
enough. And every time you get rejected, you're
Mm-hmm.
like, it's just because I'm not good enough for this
Mm-hmm.
reason or for that reason.
Right.
And so those narratives have incredible power over us, I think, especially when we believe them or we tell them
Mm-hmm.
to ourselves over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's what, endings can really trigger that, right? It's in that space
Absolutely.
that, the self-doubt and kind of the low self-worth can get triggered. And if we believe endings to be kind of failures and we're, fearful of them, we know that there's a lot of emotion that's wrapped up in that. We're afraid of being told, whether it's by other people or whether it's just by ourselves, right? But we're afraid of being told that nasty message again. Right? So part of this is being able to understand what you are telling yourself. Like, do you really believe that? Right? Like, and a lot of times people do, yeah, the people that are supposed to love me and nurture me the most and guide me have sent me these awful messages at different times in my life. It doesn't matter how great or bad your parents are, your caretakers are, like somewhere along the way they've let us down, somewhere along the way they've sent a bad message, and somewhere along the way we have accepted that message to be truth because we believe that these people are wiser and they should know.
So how do we deal with those then? What's a good way of like, now that I think the first step is identifying that you have these narratives going on in your head,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden when you have that realization, it's like, oh crap, now what do I do about it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so, okay, the messages turn into narratives, right? And the narrative is what's playing over and over and over again. So, I mean, my one suggestion is really to go to a therapist because, and that's
Yeah,
not to like, promote anything, but it's really helpful when you have somebody who understands.
it's okay to promote Vienna.
Thanks.
That's why you
No,
exist, is to help people with these things when they get
yeah.
stuck.
But that's it. It's like sometimes we need somebody on the outside helping us challenge and identify what it really is, right? So identifying what the messages are. So I go way back. I mean, we go back to childhood, and sometimes people are really resistant to that. As I don't have family issues. I don't have daddy issues. I'm not married to my mom, and people can be really avoidant of that. I know that's a classic one. And it's still something, it's something that I do because people start to recognize the value in going back to be able to see, okay, what are the messages and how have those messages turned into narratives that I believe, right? And then we dissect them, right? We take time to kind of rip those narratives apart. We take time to question whether or not we believe that to be true. We redefine it from the person because it's hard to just say, oh, but you are beautiful. This is the thing that a lot of people will do is like somebody will say, oh, I don't feel good about myself. And then all of your friends, your family will say, oh, but you are so beautiful. And they're like, that doesn't help. You know, like, you can call me beautiful or you can call me smart all you want, but if I don't believe it to be true, it doesn't change, right? So this part is about going into that space and finding a way to redefine it for ourselves and to create truth for ourselves. It's not an easy fix, right? So I don't have an actual answer to say, hey, do these 3 things and your narratives will change. But it is at least first identifying what the messages are, how they've turned into narratives, and then a willingness to challenge those narratives and basically rewrite them.
Awesome.
Right? Yeah, it's not easy stuff. You know, this stuff, it does take work. And that's, I think, going back to time heals all things. You guys know that's not true. You know that you have to be deliberate in the work that you put into yourself to challenge these messages. You get them from gender things, you get them from culture, what your parents expect, religion. There's so many messages that are being sent our way constantly. And it's really important for us to shed some light on that and dissect them and try to find a way to move forward with a better story.
Beautiful. Beautifully
Yeah.
said.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So let's touch really quickly on, I believe we have to go over the last step, right?
Nope, I
think
think
hit
that's,
that?
Yeah, we got them.
Okay, we got surround yourself with people you love.
Yep.
I love it. So let's do a quick recap, and then I have one or two more questions for you. So
Sure.
the 5 steps are, do you want to go over them?
Yeah, so the first one is let yourself feel, right? Give yourself that permission first, right? The second one is talking about it. Share it over and over and over again. Process it with people. Send yourself the message that it's important and it's okay for you to talk about it. Stay busy, not avoidant. Do the things that you love to do because you love to do them, right? If you don't know what that is, start looking for it. Create purpose for yourself. You have to maintain parts of your identity that are outside of the relationship. If you don't have them right now, seek, search, find something. Go to a meetup group. Go take a class in something, but start somewhere. The fourth one is exercise every day, right? We want to get the endorphins going. We want the serotonin, the dopamine. We want all of that going so that we're able to process things from a less emotionally flooded space. If it's not working out for you, which I still think is just important for everyone, it's finding the things that light you up. And that can be music. We see when somebody's listening to music, I don't know if you've seen like images of the brain and what's actually like lighting up. They have those images of, like your brain after sitting for an hour versus walking around for 10 minutes, and it's the same thing with music and art. It's these things that light us up and inspire us. So it's about activating that and doing that every day, right? And then the fifth one is surrounding yourself with people that love you, right? We know that the narrative of I'm not particularly lovable can be going on. And so we want to surround ourselves with people who are going to send us those positive messages that tell us that we're okay, we're loved, we belong, and that we're understood.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So when we started this conversation, you mentioned that this isn't necessarily a recipe. Like there's not just one 5-step program that if you just go through these things, it just fixes all of your problems from your breakup or your ending. So my question for you is, there's people who this stuff may just not be feasible for them right now. They're just like really, really suffering. What are some identifiers? What are some things that people can use to identify that maybe they need to seek out more help than just following these 5 steps? And then what help should they seek out?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Oh, the last part was what type of help should they seek out?
Okay, sure. Right. So some of this, there might be people listening that are like, nope, not doing any of that. And there's, it's certainly fair to say that maybe some of this or all of this didn't resonate. But if, these things that we've talked about here today, like, they're good things, they're solid things. And if we're in a space where it's very difficult for us to do any of that, that's generally a good indicator that it's it's probably a bit too heavy for us to kind of tackle on our own right now. Usually, like, even when we're hurting deeply, we can still sometimes find a piece that is like, all right, just go for a run, or all right, just pick up the phone and talk to your friend. And you might not be able to do all of this, but as long as you're doing something, that you're choosing yourself in some way, then it's like, okay, you're there. You're working in that direction. It doesn't have to be all of this, and it doesn't have to happen quickly. But as long as you're doing something that's pushing you in that direction, that's a good indicator that, like, take it at your own speed. You're okay. But if you find yourself in a space where, nope, I'm not doing any of this, like, and I can't, that it is debilitating, like, you really can't get out of bed. There's nothing, that's a deep depression, right? Like, that is very real. And not everybody that's listening has experienced that, but some who are listening have, and maybe are right now, right? And so if you're in that space, it's not these things. It's not listening to a webinar. It's not reading articles online. This is you seeking out professional help. I'm certainly biased to marriage and family therapists. I find our work, to be fascinating and incredibly important, and the systems part to it is really important, where it's not just about you. Like, this is about understanding this full picture, where we're going back to understanding messages and roles and emphasis on culture and gender and all of these things. And it's understanding our family system and how it operated and the messages we received from its operation, right? Like, this stuff is important. It's important to our success and our mental health. And so I am certainly biased to the work that we do. But any mental health professional is going to be a good bet. It's important that you find somebody that is a good fit for you. So their personality, I always recommend that people talk on the phone with the person and just get a feel for them. You can tell very quickly whether or not you'll vibe with somebody, and you like their personality, or you feel comfortable, you feel safe in that space with them. So that's important. I'm trying to think, some people might need medication, so that might entail going to a psychiatrist. But did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. Okay. I think it does. And just from personal experience, I think one of the important things that I've kind of had to take into consideration is that the most successful people in life tend to surround themselves with people who know more than they do in other aspects of life. You look at the president of the United States, he's got his cabinet, who advise him on all sorts of different aspects of running the government. If you look at, any NBA champion, he's got teammates and staff and coaches and assistant coaches who are there to, like, make sure that their bodies are running in top physical condition and that they're operating as a machine. And, like, no matter what, a CEO has a board of directors and vice presidents and other C-level executives who support running the business that they're in. So no matter what aspect of life you're in, like, you need to surround yourself with those types of people. And there's a lot of times when we do run into situations in life where we need help. Sure. And seeking out counsel is actually something that the most powerful and influential and successful people do. And there's nothing, I feel like there's a sense of, sometimes, not always, but there's a sense of, like, shame or fear around seeking out counsel around, and it's not always that way. But I know in some cultures it can be.
Sure. There can be a stigma still attached to it. Sure.
So I just wanted to emphasize, if there's people listening who are like, I'm not seeing a therapist, but they may be in that place where they can't get out of bed, or the emotions are just, like, crushing them, that there's no shame in that. Like, it's actually a really powerful and can be a really positive experience. So
yeah. You're right. You're right. Thanks for saying that. It can be hard for people to make that call and to show up for it. And you're totally on point. We need to keep people around us that are going to call us to be better. That is part of what we do. We try to call people to be better. We're experts in some ways, but you are the expert of your life, and it's your story. It's what I know nothing about you until you share it with me. And I'm not here to tell you about yourself. I'm here to work
Yeah.
through this stuff with you. And, you know, the people who are willing to receive help are the people who go further in life. Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
So if people want to get in touch with you or follow more of your work,
Mhm.
where can they get a hold of you?
Sure. And if anybody wants to work with me, you can go to my website, which is newyorkcouplescounseling.com. But otherwise, if you just want to follow on social media, the Instagram handle is mindful. That's 1L. MFT, as in marriage family therapy, which is the same handle for Twitter. And so you
And
can find that stuff there. Yeah.
I'll be sure to include links to all the ways that you can find and
Perfect.
interact with Vienna in a follow-up email that should be coming up shortly if you viewed this webinar today. So
Sure. Yeah.
awesome. Any parting words that you'd like to share with people before we end our amazing call?
Sure. I mean, I think that what's important is, we didn't cover it all. This was an
No.
hour of just trying to give some information, to create new thoughts, to have a space where it's filled with compassion and kind of love from us. There's a lot of stuff that's going on right now. And if you do have any questions, or you feel like, something wasn't covered, but you want to have more clarity around something, feel free to send us a message. And I know both of us would be happy to, talk some of that through. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your thoughts on this topic. I know there's so many people who are going to benefit from watching this video, and you're just amazing at what you do, honestly.
Thanks,
So
Nate.
I feel really honored to have been able to spend this hour with you, and I'm sure everybody else is going to really love it as well.
Thanks, Nate. That's really sweet. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
you're very welcome. All right. Well, we'll probably have you back on again soon. But for
Yeah.
those of you who are tuning in, thank you for joining us. And keep your eyes on your email inboxes. We'll send you a recorded version of this talk if you'd like to review it, and a bunch of other great stuff from Vienna and from me. So have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.